$10 says she quits before lunch. The laughter came fast, loud enough for everyone on the training field to hear. A few heads turned. A few recruits smirked. Others simply shook their heads as if the outcome had already been decided. Emma Carter adjusted the straps on her 70-pound rucksack and kept walking. She didn't look toward the voice. She didn't slow down. She didn't respond. The early morning air carried the scent of wet grass and diesel fuel across the training grounds of Camp Harrington. The sun had barely climbed over the distant hills, painting long shadows across the obstacle course where dozens of candidates prepared for another day of advanced military training. Sweat already darkened uniforms. Boots crunched over gravel. Instructors barked orders from every direction. But the laughter followed Emma anyway. "You heard me," Tyler Brooks called out, grinning at the small crowd gathering nearby. $10 says she doesn't make it through the final exercise. Several recruits chuckled. One immediately reached into his pocket. "I'll take that bet. Make it 20. You're both wasting money. She won't even make it to the halfway point." More laughter. Emma continued toward the equipment staging area as though none of it existed. That seemed to bother Tyler more than if she had argued back. He was the kind of person who enjoyed reactions. The kind who measured confidence by how many people were watching. At 24 years old, Tyler stood 6'2" and carried himself like someone who had already earned a place among the elite. He had been near the top of every physical assessment since arriving 3 weeks earlier, and he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about it, especially when Emma was around. "Look at her," he said, shaking his head. "How much does she weigh?" 120 pounds soaking wet. More laughs followed. Emma reached the equipment rack and lifted another pack from the ground. The weight barely seemed to affect her posture. She inspected a buckle, tightened a loose strap, and placed the pack neatly beside the others. Her movements were calm, deliberate, efficient. One instructor standing nearby noticed. He said nothing. The candidates assembled near the center of the field as a whistle echoed across the compound. Within seconds, conversations died. Boots shuffled into formation. The morning briefing was about to begin. Emma took her place near the back row. As usual, she never pushed to stand at the front, never tried to draw attention. Tyler and his friends occupied the center position where everyone could see them. The contrast was hard to miss. "Listen up," Senior Instructor Reynolds stepped forward. His voice cut through the field like a knife. Years of command experience had given him the rare ability to silence 100 people with only 2 words. Today's evaluation will determine who advances to the final phase of training. The recruits straightened immediately. Every eye locked onto him. By sunset, one team will finish at the top of the board. One team will finish last. The difference won't be strength. It won't be speed. It'll be leadership. A quiet murmur moved through the formation. Leadership evaluations always changed the dynamic. Suddenly, the strongest candidates weren't guaranteed success. Reynolds continued. "You'll be divided into teams. Your objective will be revealed after assignment." Tyler exchanged a confident look with his friends. He clearly expected to lead whichever team he joined. Most people did. Emma remained expressionless. Reynolds pulled a clipboard from under his arm and began reading names. Team assignments rolled out one by one. Predictably, the strongest recruits gravitated toward established friendships and familiar faces. Tyler ended up exactly where he wanted to be, surrounded by several top performers. Smiles spread through their group immediately. Then Emma's name appeared. A brief silence followed. Nobody looked excited. Nobody nodded. Nobody welcomed her. One recruit actually glanced toward another group as though hoping there had been a mistake. Reynolds didn't react. Emma Carter. Team Echo. A few seconds passed before Emma stepped forward. Team Echo stood near the edge of the formation. It wasn't difficult to notice the difference. Their scores sat near the bottom of most rankings. Their confidence wasn't much higher. One candidate offered a polite nod. Another looked uncertain. A third seemed openly frustrated by the assignment. Tyler noticed the reaction and laughed under his breath. "Good luck with that," he muttered loud enough for nearby recruits to hear. Emma simply joined her team. Reynolds waited until everyone settled before speaking again. "You have 30 minutes to prepare." His gaze swept across the formation. "And one more thing." The field became silent. The final exercise this year has a failure rate of nearly 70%. A few faces immediately lost color. Reynolds folded his arms. "Some of you think today's about proving how tough you are." He paused. You're wrong. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Today's about finding out who people become when things stop going according to plan. The statement hung in the cool morning air. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter passed overhead. Emma looked toward the mountains beyond the training grounds. The ridgeline stretched for miles beneath the rising sun. Quiet, unmoving, almost waiting. Around her, recruits checked gear, reviewed maps, and whispered nervous predictions about the mission ahead. Tyler was already collecting bets from his friends. Laughter continued to ripple through his group every time Emma's name came up. Yet while everyone else focused on the competition, Emma watched the horizon. Her expression never changed. Because unlike the others, she wasn't wondering whether she could survive the final exercise. She was wondering how long it would take before the rest of them realized they had made a very expensive mistake. The 30 minutes disappeared faster than most recruits expected. The training field transformed from organized formation lines into clusters of candidates checking gear, tightening straps, filling water containers, and exchanging nervous theories about what waited beyond the mountains. Team Echo gathered beside a row of supply crates near the edge of the compound. No one seemed particularly enthusiastic. Their assignment felt less like a team and more like a collection of leftovers. Nathan Cole stood with his arms crossed, staring toward the ridgeline in the distance. At 27, he was older than most of the candidates and carried himself with the quiet frustration of someone who had expected better results from training. Beside him, Brandon Miller adjusted the fit of his backpack for the third time in 5 minutes. His nervous energy made it difficult for him to stand still. The youngest member of the team, Luke Jensen, glanced repeatedly toward the stronger groups assembled nearby. "We got lucky," he said finally, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Maybe everyone else will have problems too." Nathan looked at him. "That is your plan." Luke shrugged. "I am trying to stay positive." Nobody laughed. The silence lingered for a moment before Brandon looked toward Emma. "You have any idea what Reynolds meant about leadership?" Emma secured a loose strap on her rucksack before answering. "Probably exactly what he said." Brandon frowned. "That does not help. It might later." The answer seemed to confuse him even more. Across the field, Tyler's team looked completely different. They were relaxed, confident. Several members sat on equipment cases laughing while Tyler continued collecting cash from recruits who wanted in on the morning's bet. Every so often he glanced toward Team Echo and smirked. Emma ignored him. She had spent enough years around competitive personalities to recognize the pattern. People often confused confidence with volume. The loudest person in the room was rarely the strongest one. A truck rolled onto the field carrying additional equipment. Instructors immediately began unloading large communication cases, navigation gear, and sealed containers marked with training exercise identifiers. Conversations died as candidates watched. Reynolds appeared again and climbed onto the tailgate. "Listen up." Every team turned toward him. "Your mission begins in 1 hour." Several candidates exchanged glances. Reynolds pointed toward the mountain range stretching across the horizon. "Each team will receive a navigation package and specialized equipment. Your objective is to reach a designated checkpoint hidden somewhere in the training zone." A few recruits nodded confidently. Navigation exercises were common. Then Reynolds continued. "You will travel approximately 18 miles through changing terrain." The confidence on several faces faded immediately. "You will carry all assigned equipment. Nothing gets left behind." More silence followed. "You will not know your destination until after departure." This time, even Tyler stopped smiling. Reynolds stepped down from the truck. "Questions?" Nobody raised a hand. "Good." As the instructors distributed equipment, Team Echo received one of the heavier communication units. The metal case weighed nearly 50 pounds by itself. Brandon stared at it. "You have got to be kidding." Luke groaned. "That thing weighs more than my first car." Nathan shook his head. "Of course we get the heavy one." Emma crouched beside the case and examined the handles. Her expression remained neutral. "We can rotate carriers." Nathan looked at her. "You say that now." "Because it is true." He seemed unconvinced. Nearby, Tyler's team erupted with laughter after receiving noticeably lighter equipment. One member pointed toward Team Echo's communication case. "Good luck hauling that mountain around." Another recruit added, "Maybe they can leave it with Emma. She looks like she only weighs 10 pounds more than the box." More laughter followed. Emma did not react. Brandon did. "Do they ever stop talking?" Nathan answered before Emma could. No, a whistle echoed across the field. Candidates moved toward designated preparation areas. Team Echo settled beneath a large canopy where maps and route materials waited on folding tables. For the first time that morning, the reality of the challenge began settling in. 18 miles through unfamiliar terrain. Heavy equipment. Limited information. No guarantee of success. Luke unfolded one of the maps and stared at it. I cannot even tell where we are supposed to go. Brandon leaned over his shoulder. Neither can I. Nathan exhaled slowly. This is going to be a disaster. Emma studied the map quietly. Her eyes moved across contour lines, ridges, elevation markers, and terrain features. She traced a finger along a narrow valley route before looking toward the mountains again. Something about her focus seemed different now. More deliberate, more attentive, almost as though she recognized details others missed. Nathan noticed. See something? Emma folded the map carefully. Not yet. That sounds mysterious. It is not supposed to. Before anyone could continue the conversation, Reynolds walked directly toward their table. The instructor stopped beside Team Echo and looked at each member one by one. His expression revealed nothing. You have 1 hour before departure. His eyes briefly settled on Emma. Use it wisely. Then he walked away. Luke watched him go. Why did that feel important? Nobody answered. Across the field, clouds drifted slowly over the distant mountains. The sunlight that had seemed warm and welcoming earlier now revealed how vast the training area truly was. The ridges appeared larger, steeper, farther away than before. For many recruits, the challenge ahead suddenly felt real. For Team Echo, another realization was beginning to emerge. Whether they wanted it or not, they were about to depend on each other. And the one person nobody had wanted on their team seemed remarkably calm for someone supposedly destined to fail. The departure signal came at exactly 9 o'clock. A loud horn echoed across Camp Harrington, cutting through every conversation at once. Candidates immediately moved toward their assigned lanes as instructors handed out sealed navigation packets. The atmosphere had changed. The casual confidence from earlier was fading. Now there was only anticipation. Team Echo stood beside their equipment stack while Nathan accepted their packet from an instructor. Do not open it until instructed, the instructor said. You leave the starting line together. You finish together. Understood. For voices answered yes. The instructor nodded and moved on. Around them, teams made final adjustments. Water supplies were checked. Boots were retied. Straps were tightened. The communication case sat in the center of Team Echo's equipment pile like an unwelcome fifth member. Brandon stared at it. I still think this thing is ridiculous. Luke laughed nervously. Maybe it is full of bricks. Nathan grabbed one handle. There is only one way to find out. The weight immediately pulled at his shoulders. Definitely not bricks. Emma stepped beside him. We will rotate every 30 minutes. Nathan looked surprised. You keep saying we. Because we are a team. He did not answer. The statement sounded simple enough, but nobody else had used the word all morning. Across the field, Tyler's team looked as relaxed as ever. Several members were smiling as they reviewed their gear. One of them pointed toward Team Echo's communication case and shook his head. Tyler followed the gesture and laughed. Looks like they are transporting a refrigerator. More laughter spread through his group. Then Tyler raised his voice. Hey, Carter. Emma turned slightly. Yeah. You might want to save your energy. That mountain is not getting any smaller. Several nearby recruits chuckled. Emma simply nodded. Good advice. Tyler looked momentarily disappointed. Once again, she had refused to give him the reaction he wanted. 5 minutes later, the starting horn sounded. Teams moved forward one after another through designated checkpoints where instructors finally authorized them to open their packets. Team Echo gathered around a folding table positioned near the entrance to the training zone. Nathan broke the seal. Everyone leaned closer. Inside were coordinates, route restrictions, elevation data, and a final destination marker hidden within several pages of navigation instructions. Brandon frowned immediately. That cannot be right. Luke looked over his shoulder. What? The route. Brandon pointed toward the map. Look at the elevation changes. Luke's eyes widened. That is insane. Nathan studied the pages more carefully. The mission was far more complicated than they expected. Their destination sat beyond multiple ridgelines and heavily wooded terrain. Several obvious routes were specifically prohibited. Others contained time penalties if used incorrectly. Success would depend entirely on navigation decisions. What do you think? Luke asked Nathan. Nathan hesitated. Honestly, yeah, I think we are in trouble. The answer hung in the air. Brandon rubbed the back of his neck. Fantastic. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Emma finally reached for the map. She studied it quietly. Her eyes moved from coordinate markers to contour lines, and then toward the actual landscape stretching ahead. This route is wrong, she said. Nathan blinked. What? Emma pointed to a narrow valley path highlighted by one of the suggested navigation corridors. Everyone will choose this. Brandon looked confused. Because it is the shortest. On paper, she traced another line farther west. Not in reality. Nathan folded his arms. You know something we do not. No, then why are you saying that? Emma looked toward the mountains again. Because valleys slow movement. Luke glanced at the map. How? Loose footing. Water crossings. Traffic. Brandon frowned. Traffic? Emma nodded. Every team wants the shortest route. Nathan stared at her for a moment. You think everybody is going to bottleneck themselves? I think they already are. Before anyone could respond, Tyler's team moved past them. Their leader glanced at Team Echo's map and grinned. Still figuring out which way north is? Several members laughed. Nathan rolled his eyes. Tyler continued walking. Do not spend too much time planning. The rest of us are trying to win. Within minutes, most teams disappeared into the training zone. Dust rose from the trails as boots carried dozens of candidates toward the mountains. Team Echo remained behind slightly longer. Nathan checked his watch. We need to move. Brandon pointed toward the valley route. Everybody else went that way. Emma folded the map. Exactly. Nathan studied her expression. For the first time all day, he seemed genuinely uncertain. You really think we should go west? Emma adjusted her rucksack. I think we should avoid following a crowd that assumes the easiest answer is the correct one. Luke looked between them. That actually makes sense. Brandon slowly nodded. Nathan exhaled. Fine. We try it. Nobody celebrated the decision. Nobody claimed certainty. But something subtle shifted as they began moving toward the western route. For the first time since the teams were formed, someone had offered a plan. More importantly, the others had listened. Ahead of them, the mountain trails stretched into the distance beneath a cloudless sky. Most recruits believed the real challenge was reaching the destination before sunset. Emma was beginning to suspect the challenge had started long before anyone stepped onto the trail. The western route looked promising during the first hour. The trail was narrow but steady, winding through pine-covered slopes that kept the team shaded from the growing afternoon sun. Team Echo moved at a consistent pace, rotating the communication case exactly as planned. For a while, Emma's assessment appeared correct. They had not seen another team since leaving the staging area. There were no crowded crossings, no delays, and no bottlenecks. Even Nathan seemed cautiously optimistic. Maybe you were right, he admitted while checking the map during a short pause. Emma took a sip of water. Maybe. Brandon laughed. That is the closest thing to confidence I have heard from you all day. Emma offered the faintest hint of a smile. Then the trail began to change. The terrain grew steeper. What had looked like a manageable ridgeline on the map revealed itself as a maze of smaller elevations and twisting paths. Tree cover thickened. Visibility dropped. Landmarks became harder to identify. Nathan slowed and checked the compass again. Something is off. Luke stopped beside him. What do you mean? Nathan studied the map. We should have reached the creek crossing 20 minutes ago. Brandon looked around. Maybe we missed it. A creek. Nathan replied. You do not accidentally miss a creek. Silence settled over the group. For the first time that day, uncertainty replaced momentum. Nathan checked the map again. Then the compass. Then the map once more. His frustration became obvious. This does not make sense. Brandon shifted the weight of the communication case onto the ground. Are we lost? Nobody answered immediately. That was answer enough. The realization spread through the group like a cold wind. They had committed to an alternate route. They had ignored the path chosen by most of the other teams. And now they were standing in unfamiliar terrain with no clear confirmation of their position. Luke exhaled heavily. This is bad. Nathan rubbed his forehead. We need to backtrack. Brandon immediately nodded. I agree. Emma remained quiet. Nathan looked toward her. What? Backtracking will cost too much time. So will wandering around in circles. We are not wandering. Nathan's patience finally cracked. Then tell me where we are. The question hung in the air. Emma looked around slowly. The trees, the slope angles, the direction of sunlight filtering through the canopy, the distant sound of moving water somewhere beyond the ridge. She seemed to be evaluating dozens of details at once. Brandon folded his arms. Well, Emma pointed toward a higher section of ground partially hidden by trees. Up there. Nathan stared at her. What is up there? Our answer. Nobody looked convinced. That is not an answer, Nathan said. That is a guess. No, Emma replied calmly. A guess would be turning around. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Nathan's expression darkened. Excuse me. We chose this route because everyone else would choose the obvious one. Emma's voice never rose. Now the first problem appears, and everybody wants the obvious solution. Brandon looked away. Luke stared at the ground. Nathan stepped closer. You are saying this is my fault. I am saying panic is not navigation. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The tension was impossible to ignore. Earlier that morning, Team Echo had barely known one another. Now exhaustion, uncertainty, and pressure were exposing every weakness. Nathan looked toward the ridgeline Emma had indicated. And what exactly do you think we find up there? Perspective. Brandon shook his head. That sounds like something from a motivational poster. Emma picked up her rucksack. Or a map. Without waiting for agreement, she started toward the slope. The others exchanged frustrated looks. Nathan remained motionless for several seconds before finally grabbing the communication case. Fine. The climb took nearly 20 minutes. It was exhausting work. The slope was steeper than it appeared from below, and the additional equipment made every step harder. Complaints grew more frequent. Brandon questioned the decision twice. Luke stumbled once and muttered something under his breath. Nathan barely spoke at all. Yet Emma continued moving at the same steady pace she had maintained since the exercise began. No rushing. No hesitation. Just forward progress. Eventually the trees opened. The team stepped onto a rocky overlook and immediately stopped. The view stretched for miles. Valleys, ridges, trails, and distant checkpoints sudda. Team Echo left the overlook with a completely different energy than they had carried up the slope. Nobody said it out loud, but the mood had changed. The doubt that had followed Emma since the beginning of the exercise was no longer as certain as it had been that morning. Nathan led the group down the newly identified connector route, while Brandon carried the communication case. The trail was narrow, hidden behind a series of rocky ridges that shielded it from view. Without the higher vantage point, they never would have noticed it. For nearly an hour they moved without seeing another team. The path curved through clusters of pine trees before descending toward a broad section of rolling terrain covered with dry grass and scattered boulders. The afternoon sun hung high overhead now, and temperatures had climbed noticeably. Sweat darkened uniforms. Water supplies grew lighter. Fatigue slowly settled into tired muscles. Yet Team Echo continued making steady progress. Nathan checked their position against the map again. This time his expression looked different. Less frustrated. More focused. If these coordinates are right, he said, we are actually ahead of schedule. Brandon laughed. I never thought I would hear those words today. Luke glanced toward Emma. Neither did I. Emma simply adjusted her pack and kept walking. The comment did not seem to affect her. That was becoming a pattern. Praise rolled off her as easily as criticism. Several minutes later, they reached a small clearing where an instructor observation point had been established. A pair of evaluators sat beneath a canopy recording times as teams passed through designated checkpoints. One of them looked up as Team Echo approached. He checked a clipboard and raised an eyebrow. Team Echo. Nathan nodded. That is us. The evaluator glanced at his watch. You are earlier than expected. Brandon immediately smiled. We like hearing that. The evaluator said nothing else. He simply marked their arrival and pointed toward the next section of the course. Proceed. As they continued forward, Luke looked back over his shoulder. Did he really say earlier than expected? Nathan nodded. He did. Brandon grinned. I am framing that moment. Even Emma seemed slightly amused. But the challenge was far from over. The next section of terrain proved more complicated than anything they had encountered so far. The route crossed multiple ridgelines, forcing the team to navigate a series of elevation changes that did not appear particularly significant on the map. In reality, each climb demanded energy they could not easily spare. The communication case felt heavier with every mile. Water consumption increased. Conversations became shorter. The mountain air remained dry and unforgiving. Eventually, Nathan called for a brief rest stop beneath a cluster of trees. Everyone lowered their gear onto the ground. Brandon stretched his shoulders and immediately groaned. I am going to remember this case for the rest of my life. Luke took a long drink from his canteen. At least we are making good time. Nathan looked toward Emma. I still do not understand something. She looked up. What? Back on that overlook. Most people would have turned around. Probably. You did not even seem worried. Emma thought about the question for a moment. Being worried does not change where you are. Brandon laughed softly. You always talk like that. Like what? Like somebody writing quotes for a leadership book. For the first time all day, a few people actually laughed together. The tension that had defined the morning seemed to be fading. Yet Nathan continued studying Emma carefully. There was something unusual about her. Not just her calmness. Not just her decisions. It was the way she processed information. She noticed details others overlooked. She evaluated situations differently. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had experienced far more than she ever discussed. Before he could ask another question, movement caught Luke's attention. Guys! Everyone turned. Far across a distant ridgeline, several teams had become visible. Tiny figures moved along exposed trails under the afternoon sun. Some appeared clustered together in large groups. Others seemed to be searching for directions. Brandon squinted. That cannot be good. Nathan pulled out the map. After a moment, his eyes widened. Those are the valley routes. Luke looked confused. The same ones everybody chose? Nathan nodded slowly. Looks like it. From their position, Team Echo could clearly see the consequences. The supposedly easier route had become crowded. Teams were competing for the same crossings, the same landmarks, and the same navigation points. Progress appeared slow. Very slow. Brandon shook his head. You called it. Emma remained silent. Nathan looked at her. How? Patterns, she replied. People usually follow them. You make it sound simple. Sometimes it is. A whistle suddenly echoed from somewhere ahead. The sound bounced across the ridges before fading into the distance. All 4 team members looked toward the source. Another checkpoint. Another phase of the exercise. Nathan stood and lifted his pack. Time to move. Brandon grabbed the communication case. Luke adjusted his straps. Emma rose without a word. Together, they started forward again. Behind them, the crowded valley route stretched across the landscape. Ahead of them, the mountains waited. And with every mile they traveled, the mystery surrounding Emma Carter only seemed to grow. The next phase of the course began to test Team Echo in ways that maps and planning could not predict. The afternoon sun drifted lower across the sky, but the temperature remained stubbornly high. Every mile felt longer than the one before it. The communication case seemed to gain weight each time it changed hands. Even the landscape appeared determined to slow them down. What looked like gentle terrain from a distance revealed hidden slopes, uneven footing, and long stretches without shade. Nathan checked his watch as they crossed another ridgeline. We are still ahead, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Brandon nodded while adjusting the communication case against his shoulder. Good, because I am running out of positive thoughts. Luke laughed weakly. Nobody had much energy left for conversation. Hours of movement had stripped away most distractions. The challenge had become simple. Keep moving. Keep navigating. Keep carrying the equipment. For a while that was enough. Then disaster arrived in the form of a single careless step. The team was descending a narrow section of trail when Luke suddenly lost his footing on loose gravel. He caught himself before falling, but the awkward movement forced him to twist his ankle. He immediately stopped and grabbed a nearby tree for balance. Oh man. Nathan turned around. What happened? Luke tested his weight and winced. I think I rolled it. Brandon set down the communication case. Seriously? Luke took another step. This time his expression tightened. Yeah, definitely. Silence settled over the group. Nobody needed to explain the problem. The course rules were clear. Teams finished together. If one member could not continue, everyone paid the price. Nathan crouched beside him. Can you walk? Yes. Luke answered quickly. Then he paused. Just not fast. The reality of the situation hit immediately. They had spent hours building an advantage. Now that advantage was slipping away. Nathan stood and looked down the trail. We cannot afford this. Brandon exhaled heavily. What do we do? Nobody answered right away. The wind moved quietly through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, another team could be heard navigating a nearby ridge. Time continued moving whether they liked it or not. Nathan finally turned toward Emma. Ideas? It was the first time all day he had asked the question without challenge in his voice. Emma looked at Luke's ankle, then at the equipment, then at the map. Her response came almost instantly. We redistribute weight. Brandon frowned. What? Luke keeps moving. We make everything else lighter for him. Nathan nodded slowly. That could work. Luke looked uncomfortable. I do not want to slow everyone down. Emma met his eyes. You already are. Luke opened his mouth, then stopped. For a second, Brandon thought the comment sounded harsh. Then Emma continued. That is why we solve the problem instead of pretending it does not exist. Nobody argued. The team immediately reorganized equipment. Nathan took additional supplies. Brandon carried more of the shared gear. Emma lifted the communication case without saying a word and secured it onto her own load. Brandon blinked. You are taking that too? Emma tightened a strap. For now. That thing weighs 50 pounds. Then I should not carry it forever. Nathan almost smiled. Within minutes they were moving again. The pace slowed, but not as much as anyone feared. Luke focused carefully on each step. Nathan monitored navigation. Brandon kept checking their progress. And Emma carried both her original pack and the communication case with the same calm determination she had shown since the exercise began. An hour passed. Then another. The trail climbed steadily toward the highest elevation point on their route. Fatigue became impossible to ignore. Yet every time Nathan checked the map, they remained in contention. Barely. I do not understand, Brandon said during a brief pause. Most people would be falling apart right now. Nathan glanced toward Emma. Somebody is keeping us in this. Emma looked toward the distant ridgeline where the final checkpoints waited beneath the fading sunlight. We are all keeping us in this. Nathan shook his head. No, we are not. For the first time, nobody disagreed with him. Because somewhere during the long miles, the woman everyone had doubted had quietly become the reason the team was still moving forward. And as the mountains cast longer shadows across the trail ahead, Team Echo realized the hardest part of the challenge was still waiting for them. The shadows stretched longer across the mountains as Team Echo pushed toward the final phase of the exercise. The golden light of late afternoon painted the ridgelines in shades of orange and copper, but nobody had time to appreciate the view. Every member of the team was feeling the accumulated weight of the day. Luke continued favoring his injured ankle. Brandon's shoulders ached from hours of carrying equipment. Nathan's focus had narrowed completely to navigation and timing. Yet somehow they were still moving. More importantly, they were still together. A checkpoint marker appeared ahead near the top of a rocky rise. The sight immediately lifted everyone's spirits. There it is, Brandon said. Please tell me that is the last one. Nathan checked the map. Not the last. Brandon groaned. I knew you were going to say that. They reached the checkpoint minutes later. An evaluator reviewed their packet, recorded their arrival time, and nodded once. Proceed to final objective. Nathan glanced at the board beside the checkpoint. Several team numbers had already been posted. His eyes widened slightly. We are still near the top. Brandon looked over his shoulder. Seriously? Very seriously. Luke smiled despite his exhaustion. I thought we were finished when I rolled my ankle. You almost were, Brandon replied. Thanks for the encouragement. The evaluator allowed himself a small smile before pointing toward the final route marker. You have approximately 4 miles remaining. For miles. Under normal conditions, it would not have sounded difficult. After everything they had already endured, it felt enormous. The trail ahead climbed steadily toward a final ridgeline that overlooked the training area. Teams could be seen in the distance moving across lower elevations. Some were still navigating. Others appeared to be searching for route markers. Team Echo resumed their march. The pace was slower now, but the determination was stronger. Something fundamental had changed since the morning. Nobody was arguing. Nobody was questioning every decision. They had become a team. About an hour into the final stretch, Nathan noticed movement ahead. Several figures were gathered near a trail junction. As Team Echo approached, the shapes became familiar. Tyler Brooks and his team. The same group that had spent the morning laughing, betting, and predicting Emma's failure. They stood beside the trail studying a map with obvious frustration. Tyler looked up first. Surprise crossed his face immediately. No way. His teammates turned around. The reactions were nearly identical. Nobody had expected Team Echo to appear there, especially not ahead of them. Brandon could not hide his grin. "Good afternoon, gentlemen." One of Tyler's teammates stared at Emma carrying the communication case. "You are still carrying that thing?" "Looks like it," Brandon answered. Tyler ignored him. His attention remained fixed on Emma. "How did you get here?" Emma adjusted her pack. "We walked." Nathan almost laughed. Tyler clearly wanted a different answer. "I mean, how are you ahead?" For the first time all day, he sounded genuinely confused. Emma looked toward the trail ahead. "We made decisions." The simplicity of the response only seemed to frustrate him more. Before the conversation could continue, Nathan pointed toward the map in Tyler's hands. "You guys lost." Tyler hesitated. That hesitation told everyone everything they needed to know. One of his teammates finally admitted it. "We took a wrong turn at the river crossing." Brandon exchanged a glance with Luke. "The valley route." Exactly as Emma predicted. Tyler folded his map and stepped aside. "Good luck." The confidence that had defined him all morning was gone. Team Echo continued forward. Nobody celebrated. Nobody taunted. The moment spoke for itself. Several minutes later, Nathan finally broke the silence. "You know what is funny?" Brandon smiled. "What?" "This morning, everyone thought Emma was the weak link." Luke nodded. "Including us." Nathan looked over at her. "Turns out we had that completely backwards." Emma kept walking. "We are not finished yet." That answer revealed more about her than any speech could have. Even now, with the finish line approaching and their position near the top of the leaderboard, she refused to focus on recognition. Her attention remained fixed on the objective ahead. The final climb began shortly afterward. The trail rose sharply toward the highest point on the course. The finish line waited somewhere beyond the ridge. Every step demanded effort. Every yard felt earned. Yet nobody complained. Not anymore. Because somewhere during the long day, Team Echo had stopped trying to survive the exercise. Now they were competing to win it. The final climb felt endless. Every step carried the weight of the entire day. The sun had begun its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the trail as Team Echo pushed toward the ridge. Nathan led with the map in one hand. Brandon followed close behind. Luke moved carefully but steadily despite his ankle. Emma remained at the rear carrying the communication case, as if the additional weight barely existed. Nobody spoke much anymore. There was simply no energy left for unnecessary words. The finish line had become the only thing that mattered. As they reached the top of the ridge, the landscape suddenly opened before them. A broad plateau stretched across the mountainside. Several military vehicles were parked near a designated finish area marked by bright flags and temporary fencing. Instructors stood beside timing stations. Candidates who had already completed the exercise sat nearby recovering from the long day. Nathan stopped for half a second. "That is it." Brandon looked up and smiled for the first time in hours. "Tell me I am not hallucinating." "You are not." Luke laughed softly. "Best thing I have seen all day." Team Echo continued forward. The finish area grew larger with every step. A few instructors noticed them approaching and began checking clipboards. One evaluator spoke quietly into a radio. Another looked visibly surprised. Nathan could not understand why. Then they crossed the finish line. A horn sounded immediately. Several heads turned. An instructor recorded their time and exchanged a glance with another evaluator. Brandon dropped his pack onto the ground and sat down heavily. "I never want to see that communication case again." Luke lowered himself beside him. Nathan bent forward with his hands on his knees, catching his breath. Emma carefully placed the communication case beside the equipment table and stepped back. Even after everything, she looked calmer than anyone else. A few minutes later, more teams began arriving. Some crossed the finish line exhausted. Others looked frustrated. Tyler's team eventually appeared as well. They were still moving strongly, but it was obvious they had lost valuable time. Tyler's expression changed the moment he spotted Team Echo already sitting in the recovery area. He looked at the scoreboard. Then he looked again. His jaw tightened. Brandon noticed immediately. "I think he finally found the leaderboard." Nathan followed his gaze. Posted on the large board near the command tent were the official rankings. Team Echo sat at the very top. First place. Luke blinked twice. "No way." Brandon stood up and walked closer. "That cannot be right." Nathan joined him. The names were unmistakable. Team Echo. First place overall. After everything they had faced, after the navigation problems, after Luke's injury, After being labeled the weakest team before departure, they had finished ahead of everyone. Tyler slowly approached the board. He stared at it in silence. One of his teammates shook his head. How? Nobody answered. Because the answer was standing a few yards away near the equipment table. An hour later, all candidates assembled near the finish area for the official debrief. The mountains glowed beneath the final light of sunset. Instructors stood before the group while candidates gathered in rows. Senior Instructor Reynolds stepped forward holding a clipboard. Today was not a test of endurance, he began. It was a test of judgment, adaptability, leadership, and teamwork. The crowd remained silent. Reynolds continued. Many teams had strong athletes. Many teams had excellent navigators. Only one team consistently demonstrated all four qualities together. He looked directly toward Team Echo. Applause began spreading through the assembled candidates. Nathan glanced toward Emma. She looked as uncomfortable with attention as she had all morning. Reynolds waited for the applause to fade. Then he added something unexpected. There is another reason Team Echo deserves recognition. The crowd quieted immediately. Reynolds checked his notes. Several of you spent the morning making assumptions about one particular candidate. A few heads turned toward Emma. Tyler looked down. Reynolds continued. Some assumed she lacked experience. Some assumed she would become a liability. Some assumed she was the weakest member of her team. The silence became almost uncomfortable. Reynolds closed the clipboard. What most of you did not know is that Emma Carter previously served as an advanced field training instructor before entering this program. A wave of surprise moved through the crowd. Several candidates exchanged stunned looks. Tyler's eyes widened. Brandon looked at Emma. You never told us that. Luke stared at her. You train people? Nathan laughed softly in disbelief. That explains a lot. Reynolds nodded. She spent years teaching navigation, leadership under pressure, and team movement in challenging environments. More whispers spread through the crowd. Suddenly, every strange observation from the day made sense. The route decisions, the calmness, the ability to read terrain, the refusal to panic, the quiet confidence. None of it had been luck. Emma had known far more than anyone realized. Reynolds looked across the formation one final time. The lesson should be obvious. Competence does not always announce itself. Sometimes the strongest person in the group is the one nobody bothers to notice. For the first time all day, nobody laughed at Emma Carter. They simply looked at her with a level of respect she had earned long before any of them arrived on that mountain. The formal debrief ended as the last light of day faded beyond the mountains. Candidates slowly dispersed across the training area, gathering equipment, exchanging stories, and trying to process everything that had happened during the exercise. The energy felt different now. The loud confidence that had filled the morning was gone. In its place was something quieter, something more honest. Team Echo remained near the edge of the finish area, sitting together on a row of equipment cases while instructors completed paperwork. Brandon still seemed unable to stop smiling. I am going to remember Tyler's face for the rest of my life. Luke laughed. The moment he saw the leaderboard? Exactly that moment. Nathan shook his head. Honestly, I was more surprised by the instructor announcement. He looked toward Emma. You really trained people before this? Emma nodded once. For a while. For a while. Brandon repeated. That sounds like the world's biggest understatement. Emma shrugged. It was my job. Nathan leaned back against the equipment case. You could have told us. Nobody asked. The answer made everyone laugh. It was exactly the kind of response they had come to expect from her. Simple, direct, completely free of ego. Nearby, several candidates who had overheard the conversation glanced in Emma's direction. Earlier that morning, many of those same people had ignored her. Some had doubted her. A few had openly laughed. Now they watched her differently. Not because she demanded attention, because she had earned respect without ever asking for it. As darkness settled over the training grounds, the candidates began returning to the main camp aboard a series of transport trucks. Team Echo climbed into one of the last vehicles. The ride back was quiet. Exhaustion finally caught up with everyone. The mountains disappeared behind them while the lights of Camp Harrington slowly came into view. When they arrived, most candidates headed directly toward the dining facility. Others returned to their barracks. Team Echo moved together without really discussing it. Somewhere during the long day, they had become more than an assigned group. They had become friends. The dining hall buzzed with conversation. Stories from the exercise echoed across the room. Teams compared routes. Candidates debated decisions. Instructors occasionally passed through, listening without comment. As Team Echo collected trays and searched for a place to sit, an unexpected figure stepped into their path. Tyler Brooks. The room seemed to quiet slightly. Not because anyone expected an argument, because everyone remembered how the day had started. Tyler looked noticeably different from the confident recruit who had spent the morning collecting bets. He held a folded $20 bill in one hand. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Tyler looked directly at Emma. "I owe you this." Emma glanced at the money. "You do?" Tyler nodded. "The bet." Brandon immediately smiled. Luke tried not to laugh. Nathan simply watched. Tyler continued. "Actually, I probably owe you more than that." Emma looked at him for a second before shaking her head. "Keep it." Tyler blinked. "What? Keep it? Seriously?" Emma nodded. "You earned it." Tyler looked completely confused. "I lost." "Maybe." Emma picked up her tray. "But maybe you learned something useful." The answer left him speechless. For the second time that day, he had no response. Emma walked past him and continued toward an empty table. The others followed. Tyler remained standing there for several seconds before finally folding the bill and putting it back into his pocket. Later that evening, after dinner had ended and most candidates returned to their quarters, Nathan stepped outside the barracks and found Emma sitting alone on a bench overlooking the dark training fields. The same mountains that had challenged them all day stood quietly against the night sky. Nathan sat beside her. For a while neither spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "You know, this morning I thought you were the weakest person on the team." Emma smiled faintly. "I know. And somehow you never seemed offended." She looked toward the distant ridgeline. "People usually see what they expect to see." Nathan nodded slowly. "Well, I was wrong." Emma turned toward him. "So was I." He looked surprised. "About what?" "I thought none of you would listen." Nathan laughed. "Fair point." The two sat quietly for another moment. Then a whistle sounded somewhere across the camp as instructors completed the final checks of the evening. Another training day had ended. Another lesson had been learned. Out on the dark field where the exercise had begun, the wind moved softly through the grass. The laughter from that morning was gone. The assumptions were gone too. What remained was something far more valuable. Not a trophy, not a title, not a leaderboard. Respect. The kind that could not be demanded, borrowed, or faked. The kind that had to be earned one decision at a time. And on that mountain, Emma Carter had earned every bit of it.